What's the nature of your emergency?
Welcome back to the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Wilton, joined by Sergeant Wilton. And how are you?
I'm good.
We're going to talk about addiction and coping. And I think that when we understand that coping might look like addiction, it kind of helps us to be able to avoid some self-destruction behavior. And a lot of the times it might be hard to recognize. So I thought that we can go over a little bit of this.
There's so many... In the first responder realm, there's so many different levels of addiction and dealing with coping mechanisms associated to the trauma that you may experience on a regular basis. And I can think of a handful of different things, but it's being able to have those healthy resolutions to where you're not leaning on something negative and something more positive.
So here's the thing. Addiction doesn't always come in a bottle or in a pill. And I think that for first responders, it often hides behind acceptable behaviors because you can't turn to the bottle or to the pill as a first responder. And it could be things like picking up extra shifts. Maybe you're constantly working out. You're buying more tactical gear, maybe more than your budget allows. Of course, there's things like gambling, but there are a lot of subtle forms of addiction in first responders in particular. The first one, of course, is the overworking. So maybe you're taking every single overtime shift that's offered for you, not for the money, but maybe because you want to avoid going home or being alone with your thoughts, for example. And this can be super harmful because it'll lead to things like burnout, resentment, disconnection with your family, or even yourself.
Yeah, overburdening yourself with just being constantly working is a coping mechanism, and it's something that to where you know people will rationalize it, and I've heard it hundreds of times of, well, I need the money, I need this, I need that, and really what they're doing is trying to work themselves into submission.
So this next one actually goes in tandem with that, which is compulsive spending. So that might be why they need the money and another reason why they're taking those overtime shifts. So if you're constantly buying gear or guns or gadgets and, boats and bikes and things that you want but you don't need just because you want that dopamine hit, and then maybe you feel a little bit of regret after, even if you're not admitting it, that financial stress is going to add up. And spending rarely addresses that real emotional void.
Yeah, you're putting a Band-Aid on an arterial bleed and spending all this money all the time, and you get that hit, that is dopamine hit right when you purchase it, but then afterwards you're like, well, I didn't really need that. Now I have to work a whole bunch more, and it's a never-ending cycle of working and spending to where you're never going to catch up.
Another example is that you're over-exercising or you're obsessing with your fitness or even your diet. I'm thinking about a female who had posted in our Police, Fire, Military, and Families Facebook group a while back, but it was something that I always remembered because it was such an unusual and unhealthy behavior. And what she said is that ever since she could remember, when she and her family have New Year's, they all get together on New Year's Day and they all have a scale. And then they weigh each other and they all take stock of how much everybody weighs. And she didn't present it in a way to where it's a healthy accountability that's held throughout the year. It was almost like, oh, you gained 20 pounds this year. You gained 30 pounds this year. And that's something that they all carry with them throughout the rest of the year. And I just felt like that's such an unhealthy thing to do. It could be a very healthy thing, but the way it was presented, it was incredibly unhealthy. And so a lot of people might do things like training to exhaustion every day, not out of health, but because they're trying to suppress anxiety or emotions. And when we do stuff like this, it turns our physical health into punishment, and it can even cause emotional or physical injury.
You're like that to me, it could be such a healthy thing. And as I'm thinking of it, I'm like, man, that's kind of a cool idea. But then when you hear the explanation with it, you're like, man, you're using that as fuel to kind of go after each other every year. And that's not a healthy way of doing things, because is it necessarily working? If it's working and you guys are supporting each other and building each other up, then that's great. But if you're using as well, you gained 20 pounds this year and starting to use that as a negative annotation towards that individual, like that's just not healthy.
Yeah. And just to give an example of how I sat in the background and saw that spiral out throughout that year, that individual lost dramatic weight, gained dramatic weight, and I saw her emotional behavior become like erratic. I was about to say erotic. Maybe it did. I don't know. And, that's why I believe it was incredibly unhealthy. We have other things too, of course, like gambling or risk-seeking behavior. So you might go to the casino often. You might do online bets. You might have risky investments, and it might feel exciting in the moment. But of course, this is reckless in hindsight.
Yeah, having a balance with everything, and like there's so many healthy approaches to being able to deal with whatever you have going on and not finding these negative outlets to be able to do. And I'm not saying that like gambling isn't unhealthy. Like if you enjoy it, enjoy it, but you have to set your limits. You have to know what you're doing and be okay with that.
Yeah, and another example would be numbing with food or porn or your screens even. So things like binge eating, maybe you're compulsively scrolling on your phone, or you're using porn as an emotional escape. I think this can be super harmful behavior because it's just going to numb your emotions rather than allowing things to be processed.
I heard a commercial the other day, and it was a lady talking, and I don't remember if it was on the radio or TV, but she was talking about, I eat when I'm happy and I eat when I'm sad, and using food as a coping mechanism for just emotion in general is not a healthy thing to do. And it's being able to recognize that and adapt to that and change that if you want to.
Yeah, but there are ways to be able to break the cycle and then reclaim that control. And I think that asking ourselves, is this a choice or is this a compulsion, is a big indicator to be able to just pause and ask yourself, are you really doing this activity to feel better or to avoid a feeling?
The recognition of that feeling of that compulsion associated to it is one of those things that you really want to recognize, because if you don't recognize it, then all you're doing is just going down that rabbit hole more and more.
This might sound silly, but I think tracking those patterns and those triggers is so important. So you can just use the Notes app in your phone and recognize when and why certain behaviors are showing up. So maybe it's after a long shift, or you're having an argument with your spouse, and then you turn to gambling, or you turn to porn, or you turn to whatever the thing is. Like start documenting this and then that. That way you can understand what those triggers are to help to better supplement something in a healthy way.
Well, and like we've said before, is it's all information. Being able to gather that information and find an answer to that problem it's anything we have is information, and being able to gain that is just huge.
Yeah, and then we can replace that behavior, not just remove it, right? Because then you're going to have this giant void to where it's probably going to turn into something even worse later on. But find a healthier outlet to fill that space.
Like using the workout as an example, like still work out. It's good to work out. But overdoing it and it's setting time limits, finding a balance with working out, or just being outside and going for a walk. Like having healthy outlets, not just so as intense as doing a heavy workout every day.
I'm not a Catholic, but I'm thinking about something that the Catholics really do right, even if they don't realize that this is the impact that it's having. And that is confession. Because I think that when you're saying something out loud, confession can create incredible clarity. And that's why it's so important to make sure that you're honest, not only with yourself, but also somebody else that you can trust.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It was saying being honest to yourself. I think that's the hardest part that everyone struggles with. Is it's easy for us to tell ourselves these half-truths or these lies associated to whatever the problem is, but being able to be truthfully honest to ourselves is it takes work, and being able to work through that.
And doing it in a healthy way. I'm thinking back to when we were dating, and maybe even at the beginning of our marriage, where the negative self-talk and the belittling was something that I told you, like hard no, right? This isn't how we do that. Instead of saying like, man, I'm so fucking stupid. Man, I could have done that a lot better. What can I do instead?
Yeah, if you always are talking down to yourself, like you're going to keep feeding that beast, and you need to have that positivity with it. And I remember that conversation and Ashley telling me that, like, it was one of those things, like, we need to address this early on and be open to changing it.
Yeah, that's something I got from my childhood, right? Like I've always been my own personal cheerleader. Like, Ash, that was awesome. Like I'm like constantly just like my own cheerleader in my head. And I think it's really important for us to be able to reinforce things for ourselves. I hope you've gotten some value out of today's episode. If you have, do us a favor, drop a review, subscribe down below, and as always, know that I'm sending you a long, tight hug from my home to yours.